In October of the year 79, over Pompeii, the sky split open. A colossal roar hurled a column of smoke and ash all the way to the edge of the atmosphere. Hours later, waves of fire and scorching gas swept down from the mountain. They vaporized Herculaneum in an instant. Soon after, they overwhelmed Pompeii, condemning the last survivors to death. The Roman Empire ruled the known world. It was the Pax Romana, a time of order, prosperity, and unshakable confidence in the permanence of its civilization. Along the Bay of Naples, the empire's most prosperous corner, two cities embodied that dream. Pompeii, lively and commercial, and Herculaneum, a sanctuary of luxury. Both lived under the shadow of the generous mountain, Vesuvius, whose slopes offered fertile soil and abundant vineyards. No one knew it was a volcano. No one imagined it was a geological time bomb. In less than 24 hours, two of the wealthiest cities in the Roman Empire would vanish from the map. Yet it wasn't an attack. It was a geological sentence. This is the story of their final hours. Chapter 1. A Morning in Paradise. Dawn breaks on October 24th in the year 79. Nowhere else in the vast Roman Empire is life sweeter or more vibrant than along the Bay of Naples. This is the Campagna Felix, the fortunate countryside, playground of the Roman elite and commercial engine of southern Italy. Morning air drifts in cool and clean, and the sun rises over the mountain that shapes the entire landscape, an impressive, calm, green presence known to everyone as Vesuvius. Pompeii is already wide awake. Smoke rises from the city's 35 bakeries, mixing with the scent of the sea and the drains. Its streets pulse with life. Iron delivery wheels have carved deep grooves into the volcanic stone roads, a testament to relentless trade. Thermopylae, the ancient world's fast food stalls, are opening, serving warm wine and porridge to dock workers and slaves just starting their day. In the Great Forum, the center of civic and religious life, the city hums. Magistrates in their togas argue politics. Merchants strike deals in the basilica. On building walls, red campaign graffiti announces the upcoming elections. Vote for Caecilius. The neighbors of Popedius Secundus ask that he be elective aedile. Pompeii is a city of the middle class, of new money, proud, noisy, and bustling. 20,000 souls live here, and each one has plans for the day. To the west, its sister city, Herculaneum, offers a different scene. If Pompeii works, Herculaneum relaxes. It's smaller, cleaner, and far wealthier. Rather than a commercial hub, it's an exclusive seaside resort. Senators and Roman aristocrats keep their villas here, built on terraces that step down toward the shore. Their mosaics are exquisite, their gardens manicured. Residents of Herculaneum enjoy a private library, the only one to survive from antiquity, and luxurious suburban baths with direct views of the bay. Life here is serene, cultured, and sheltered from Pompeii's noise. It is the pinnacle of Roman leisure. Both cities, different in spirit yet sharing the same horizon, owe their prosperity to Vesuvius. To them, it isn't a threat, but a garden. Its slopes coated in rich black soil produce Vesuvinum, one of the region's most prized wines. The word volcano existed, drawn from Vulcan, the god of fire whose forge lay underground. But it was a word for distant mountains like Etna in Sicily, which spat fire often. Vesuvius did not. It had been silent for at least 700 years. To the people, it was simply a mountain, a provider, a backdrop to paradise. On this October morning, while Pompeii works and Herculaneum rests, no one looks at the mountain with fear. No one realizes that the fertile ground beneath their feet exists because of ancient, violent eruptions. No one knows the mountain is no garden at all, but a sleeping giant, one whose awakening is imminent. Chapter 2: The Broken Memory. But paradise had cracks. For those who knew how to look, the clearest morning had come 17 years earlier. In the year 62 of our era, a devastating earthquake shook the entire region. It wasn't a simple tremor, but a violent blow that nearly destroyed Pompeii completely. The damage was catastrophic. The Temple of Jupiter, the city's most important sanctuary, collapsed. Lead pipes that brought fresh water to fountains and homes split apart, leaving the city thirsty. It's said that entire flocks of sheep died, suffocated by strange gases rising from fissures in the ground. Everywhere, statues of gods and emperors toppled from their pedestals and shattered on the pavement. That earthquake left a deep fear in the people. Many abandoned the region forever, unable to bear the idea that the ground beneath their feet could betray them again. Most Pompeians, however, stayed. With stubborn determination, they began to rebuild. "17 years later, in the year 79, Pompeii was still in many ways a city under construction. Wooden scaffolding leaned against facades of nearly every street. Piles of sand and lime sat ready to mix for repairing damaged walls. Inside the Temple of Isis, a fresh inscription proudly proclaimed that it had been rebuilt from the foundations by the family of a wealthy man who, once a slave, sought social prestige by financing the project. The city was patching itself together, becoming larger and more dazzling than before, covering the scars of the past with bright new colors. Yet, a tragic problem lingered. The Romans, brilliant engineers who built aqueducts and roads that still stand, lacked the science to understand what happened to them. They didn't connect the earthquake to the mountain looming above. To them, earthquakes weren't earthly processes. They were matters of the gods. They believed it was Neptune's anger, the god who shook the sea and land alike. They had no idea that the quake of '62 was Vesuvius's first warning. Molten rock, magma, was rising from deep within the earth, cracking through stone, searching for a way out. The giant was waking. In the years that followed, tremors continued. They became routine, no different from summer heat or winter rain. People learned to live with them, to ignore the rattling dishes or the new cracks forming in their walls. They normalized fear, turning it into background noise. So when the ground trembled again in October of '79, no one ran. No one glanced at Vesuvius in terror. They simply added it to the long list of daily annoyances, unaware that this time, the earth wasn't just going to shake, it was going to open. Chapter 3: The Ignored Warnings. In the days leading up to the disaster, nature began shouting its warnings, but only those who knew how to listen could hear them. Across the farms around Vesuvius, wells started drying up in strange and sudden ways. Rain wasn't the issue. Extreme heat rising from underground was evaporating the water before it could reach the surface. The water that remained tasted odd, metallic, and bitter. The air changed as well. A foul smell like rotten eggs drifted on the breeze. It was sulfur, volcanic gas leaking through invisible cracks along the mountain slope. Animals, always more sensitive than humans to hidden dangers, were the first to react. Goats and sheep grazing along the hillside refused to eat and tried to flee downhill, slamming themselves against their pens. City dogs howled at night with no clear reason. Even the birds vanished from the skies above Pompeii, as if they knew the air had become unsafe. Along the coast, fishermen began hauling in empty nets, or worse, nets full of dead fish floating belly up in the bay's warm waters. Most people ignored these signs, or dismissed them as bad omens that could be fixed with the right sacrifice at the right temple. But on the opposite side of the bay, at the naval base in Misenum, one man saw everything through a different lens. His name was Pliny the Elder. He was the admiral of the Roman imperial fleet. But above all, he was a scientist, a man driven by insatiable curiosity. He had written a massive encyclopedia, Natural History, an attempt to explain all the mysteries of the world. To Pliny, the dead fish and the sulfur smell weren't messages from angry gods. They were pieces of a natural puzzle he was determined to solve. That morning, Pliny was in his study, working as usual. His 17-year-old nephew, also named Pliny, lived with him. While the young man tried to focus on his rhetoric books, his uncle, the admiral, took notes, fascinated by the strange reports arriving at his desk. When someone brought him a bird that had fallen dead onto one of his ships, Pliny the Elder felt no fear, only deep curiosity. He examined the creature, searching for signs of illness or poison. He couldn't have known that the cause of death wasn't the bird at all, but the air itself, already filling with invisible toxic gases. Pliny the Elder believed wholeheartedly that reason could explain anything. But that confidence was about to collide with a force beyond human logic. While he studied the dead bird, beneath Pompeii's soil, the pressure of rising magma reached its breaking point. The time for warnings had ended. Chapter 4. The Ash Column. It was around 1 in the afternoon when the world changed forever. Inside Vesuvius, the pressure of magma that had been building up for centuries finally broke through the rock, sealing the crater. The hard stone plug that had kept the volcano asleep shattered into 1,000 pieces. The sound was unlike anything anyone had ever heard, an explosion powerful enough to rupture the eardrums of anyone nearby. In Pompeii, the ground shook so violently that people were thrown off their feet. Carts toppled over and roof tiles rained onto the streets like baked clay hail. The worst danger, however, wasn't on the ground. It was in the sky. From the torn open summit, a monstrous column of ash, gas, and rock shot upward at supersonic speed. It climbed higher and higher, punching through the clouds, rising nearly to the edge of space. In Misenum, across the bay, young Pliny and his mother were on their terrace when they saw it. Years later, Pliny would write the only first-hand account we have of that moment. He said it looked like a Mediterranean pine, a tall, narrow trunk of gray smoke rising straight into the sky and spreading out at the top into flat branches. That description was so exact that today, 2,000 years later, volcanologists use the term Plinian phase to describe this kind of explosive eruption. Terror swept through Pompeii instantly. People rushed out of their homes, staring upward, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. The midday sun vanished behind the massive cloud. A cold, unnatural shadow fell across the city. Market vendors fled their stalls, leaving coins and goods scattered on the counters. Bakers abandoned bread still in the oven. In the bathhouses, people ran into the streets naked or half-dressed. No one knew whether it was a strange storm or the end of the world. Some ran to the temples to pray. Others sprinted home to find their families or to grab their most precious belongings, a pouch of coins, a gold necklace, a small statue of a protective god. That choice, to return home instead of fleeing immediately toward the city gates, would be fatal for many, because the towering pine-shaped column was not going to stay in the sky forever. What rises must fall, and Vesuvius was about to send back everything it had hurled into the heavens. Chapter 5: The Burning Snow. Shortly after 1 in the afternoon, something began falling from the sky over Pompeii. At first it seemed harmless. Small white stones, light as air, about the size of a pea. The Romans called them lapilli, little stones. We know them as pumice, a volcanic rock full of gas bubbles, so light it can float on water. They drifted down gently like a strange snowfall in the middle of autumn. They tinkled as they hit the tile rooftops and bounced across the stone-paved streets. People watched with curiosity. Some even scooped them up, surprised that they were warm to the touch but didn't burn. It was a moment of confusion, not yet full panic. Many thought it was just an odd hailstorm that would soon pass. They kept trying to gather their belongings or find family members lost in the initial chaos. But the snowfall didn't stop. The white stones began to fall harder and in greater numbers. Within an hour, the streets were covered in a thick layer of them. Walking became difficult, like trudging across a beach of loose, hot gravel. What saved some and doomed others came down to something as simple as the wind. That day, the wind blew southeast, pushing the massive cloud of ash and stone directly over Pompeii. The city sat squarely in the bullseye. To the west, however, Herculaneum lived a completely different reality. Thanks to the wind's direction, the sky over Herculaneum remained relatively clear. They could see the monstrous column of smoke rising from the volcano, but almost nothing fell on them. This created a false and dangerous sense of safety in Herculaneum. Watching the devastation unfolding over their neighbors, many convinced themselves they were protected, whether by the gods or mere luck. Some took advantage of the calm to flee, but others chose to stay, believing the worst would pass them by. They didn't know the wind would change, and that the volcano had a far crueler and far quicker fate reserved for them than for Pompeii. Meanwhile, in Pompeii, the white snow kept falling, piling up slowly hour after hour, beginning to bury the city beneath a hot, pale blanket. Chapter 6. Night at Noon. As the afternoon wore on, the situation in Pompeii shifted from strange to desperate. The rain of white stones changed. Now gray stones were falling, denser, heavier, and hot. Even though it was only 3 or 4 in the afternoon, Pompeii was plunged into night. A total suffocating darkness broken only by lightning crackling inside the volcanic column and by the red glow blazing at the summit of the mountain. People lit torches and oil lamps, but the light barely pierced a few steps ahead of the thick rain of ash. Every family then faced a terrible dilemma: stay or flee. Fleeing meant stepping out into absolute darkness, walking on streets buried under hot stones with pillows tied to their heads to shield themselves from the falling rocks. It meant abandoning everything they owned and risking getting lost or being trampled by terrified crowds at the city gates. Staying seemed safer. Roman houses with their thick stone walls offered solid protection from the hail of rocks. Many families chose to barricade themselves inside, waiting for the storm to pass, trusting their homes to withstand it. But it was a fatal mistake. Pumice stones are light on their own, but millions of them weigh tons. As they piled up on flat or slightly slanted roofs, the weight grew unbearable. Wooden beams began to groan and bend. By late afternoon, Pompeii's roofs began to collapse. With a terrifying crash, tiles and beams gave way, burying the families who had taken shelter beneath them. Those who survived the initial collapse were trapped under the rubble, while ash continued to pour through the roof of the hole, slowly burying them alive. The homes meant to protect them became their tombs. Outside, people could hear the roof failures and the muffled screams, feeding the rising panic. There was no safe place left in Pompeii. Chapter 7: The Rescue Mission. While Pompeii was beginning to sink beneath the falling stones, across the bay in Misenum, Pliny the Elder's scientific curiosity was turning into urgency. Early that afternoon, when the strange cloud first appeared, Pliny had ordered a light, fast boat to be prepared. He wanted to cross the bay and get close enough to study the phenomenon with his own eyes. But just as he was leaving his house with his writing tablets under his arm, a messenger arrived running, out of breath. He carried an urgent note. It was from Rectina, a friend of Pliny who lived in a villa at the foot of Vesuvius near Herculaneum. The note was a desperate plea for help. Rectina explained that she was terrified by what was happening and that there was no way to escape by land. Roads were blocked or too dangerous. Her only hope was the sea. She begged Pliny, the admiral of the most powerful fleet in the world, to rescue her. Pliny realized this wasn't just an interesting natural event. It was a human catastrophe. He changed his plans instantly. Instead of taking a small, fast boat just for himself, he ordered the quadrimes, the great warships of the Roman fleet, to be launched. These were massive vessels powered by 4 rows of oars, built for battle, but now destined to face an enemy far greater than any human army. It became the first organized naval rescue mission in recorded history. Pliny wasn't only trying to save Rectina. He intended to evacuate as many people as possible from the doomed coastline. When the ship's pilots warned him of the danger, the ash was already beginning to fall over the sea. The waters were rough, and sailing into the darkness of the cloud looked like suicide. Pliny did not hesitate. According to his nephew, the admiral then spoke a phrase that has echoed through the centuries. Audentes fortuna javat. Fortune favors the bold. With that command, the Roman fleet set out directly into the heart of the volcanic storm in a heroic attempt to snatch lives away from the mountain. Chapter 8. Agony in Stabii. Pliny's brave fleet never reached Herculaneum. As they drew closer to the coast, the situation became impossible. Huge chunks of pumice and charred black rock were falling onto the decks. The sea itself seemed to have gone mad, suddenly shallow, filled with sandbanks created by the debris the mountain was spewing out. It was impossible to land without running the ships aground and condemning them to certain destruction. Faced with the inability to reach Rectina, Pliny made a quick decision. He ordered the pilot to turn south toward Stabii, a town on the opposite side of the bay where his friend Pomponianus lived. He believed they would be safer there and could wait for the worst to pass, or attempt a rescue from that side if the wind shifted. They reached Stabii later in the afternoon. There they found Pomponianus and his family terrified, ready to flee but trapped because of the wind blowing violently towards the shore, making it impossible for any ship to set out. Pliny, a Roman Stoic to the core, tried to calm their fear with his own composure. He embraced his friend, offered reassurance, and to prove there was no immediate danger, asked for a bath. Afterward, he sat down to dinner, chatting calmly while Vesuvius lit up the night with massive bursts of flame that he explained in scientific tones as fire from abandoned farms, so as not to frighten his host even more. Once the meal was over, he astonishingly went to sleep. Perhaps it was genuine exhaustion, or perhaps it was his last great performance or calm meant to comfort everyone around him. But the situation was worsening by the minute. The courtyard of the house was filling with so much pumice and ash that had Pliny slept any longer, he would have been sealed inside his room. His friends woke him with urgent shouts. They left the house with pillows tied to their heads for protection. Then they headed to the beach to see whether the sea had calmed enough to escape by boat. Yet the water remained wild, driven by an unrelenting onshore wind. There, on the shoreline, under an almost total darkness broken only by the glow of the volcano's flames, Pliny the Elder suddenly fell ill. He was a large man with chronic breathing problems, and the air was now thick with sulfur, fumes, and toxic gases rolling down from the mountain. He asked for a little cold water. He drank twice. Then, trying to stand with the help of 2 slaves, he collapsed immediately. The poisonous gases, heavier than air, had collected at the ground level, suffocating him. His body was found 2 days later. Once daylight returned, it was intact without injuries, and he looked more asleep than dead. The great naturalist had died while studying the most magnificent and terrifying natural phenomenon he had ever encountered. His curiosity had carried him all the way to the end. Chapter 9. The False Calm. Around 1 in the morning on October 25th, something strange happened in Pompeii. The relentless rain of stones which had been falling for 12 hours began to ease until it nearly stopped. After the deafening roar of collapsing buildings and the constant rattle of millions of falling rocks, a sudden silence settled over the city. It was thick, unnatural stillness, broken only by the moans of the injured and the crackle of distant fires. For 1,000 survivors crouched in the safest corners of their homes or trembling in their cellars, that silence felt like a gift from the gods. Many believed the nightmare was over. They thought the volcano had exhausted itself and the worst had passed. Slowly and with fear, people began to emerge from their shelters. What they found was a city beyond recognition. The streets had vanished beneath a deep blanket of gray pumice stone. They had to climb out through upper floor windows because the doors on the ground level were blocked by the mountain of debris. They walked across the rooftops of their own city, stumbling into the darkness, guided only by flickering torches. Some decided it was the moment to flee, to try reaching the city gates before the storm resumed. Others, exhausted and disoriented, chose to wait for sunrise, convinced that daylight would bring salvation. Yet that silence was no ending. It was a deadly pause. What was happening was far more terrifying than the earlier rain of stone. The massive column of ash and gas that had stood over the volcano for hours, held aloft by the immense pressure rising from the earth, was beginning to lose strength. The column could no longer support its own colossal weight in the air. Millions of tons of burning rock and toxic gas were about to collapse inward and crash down toward the ground. Nature had offered the people of Pompeii a cruel false hope. That silence was merely the moment when the executioner raised the axe before the final blow. The true horror, the kind no one would survive, was just about to begin. Chapter 10: The Sentence of Herculaneum. Around 1:30 in the morning, the towering column above Vesuvius collapsed. It wasn't a slow descent, it was a catastrophic failure. Millions of tons of superheated gas, ash, and rock formed a burning avalanche that rushed down the volcano at terrifying speed. Scientists call this a pyroclastic flow, a technical label for what is essentially a hurricane of fire. Herculaneum, the city that had been spared until that moment thanks to the wind, lay directly in its path. The scorching cloud struck the town with unimaginable force. Air temperature soared instantly. There was no chance to run, not even enough time to understand what was happening. The entire city was swallowed in a single moment. Wood in the houses didn't burn, it carbonized immediately, turning to charcoal from the overwhelming heat. Down on the shore, hundreds of people waited desperately for rescue boats that would never come. They sought shelter beneath the large stone arches where fishing skiffs were stored, convinced the thick stone walls would protect them. Instead, those vaults became deadly traps. When the boiling cloud swept inside, death came in an instant. Not by slow suffocation, but in a far quicker, far more violent way. The heat was so extreme that their bodies experienced immediate thermal shock, their muscles contracting violently in less than a heartbeat. In the blink of an eye, Herculaneum, the jewel of the coast, was wiped off the face of the earth. It was buried under a thick layer of molten volcanic debris which, as it cooled, solidified into rock and sealed the city for nearly 17 centuries. Chapter 11: The Fall of Pompeii. Pompeii had survived the night, but dawn would bring its final end. Early in the morning, a new series of pyroclastic surges swept down from the volcano. The first wave stopped just short of the city walls, but the fourth was unstoppable. That burning cloud overtook the defenses and surged through the streets of Pompeii, killing every living being in seconds. It didn't vaporize its victims instantly, as it had in Herculaneum. It did something different. Something that would leave a haunting mark for future generations. The intense heat cooked the bodies. People's muscles contracted violently, pulling their arms and legs inward. That is why so many victims appear to be in a defensive position, like boxers shielding their faces. Scientists call it the pugilistic posture. It wasn't a prolonged struggle. A single breath of that ash-filled scalding air laden with toxic gases would have burned their lungs from the inside, causing almost immediate asphyxiation. It was then that most of the remaining inhabitants of the city died. Entire families were found embracing in their homes. Groups of people caught while trying to flee through the streets, buried in pumice. Even a chained dog that couldn't escape. All were frozen in time at that precise instant of death. Volcanic ash, fine as powder, quickly covered their bodies. Over time, that ash hardened, forming a rocky shell around them. As centuries passed, their bodies decayed, but they left behind perfect molds in the hardened ash, impressions of clothing, hands, and the final gesture they made before dying. These hollow cavities, filled with plaster by modern archaeologists, have given us the most moving and iconic images of the tragedy. The molds of Pompeii's victims. Chapter 12. The End of the World. Across the bay in Messinium, the horror arrived as well, though in a different form. Pliny the Younger, who was 18 at the time, left us an account that is not the story of a hero, but of a terrified teenager who believed the end of the world had come. At dawn, a black, menacing cloud, charged with lightning, began chasing them across the land. Pliny and his mother decided to flee the city before becoming trapped. They joined a panicked crowd that shoved and screamed in the darkness. A thick darkness covered us, Pliny wrote years later. Not like a night without moon or stars, but like the darkness of a room whose lamp has been extinguished. Terror was absolute. The screams of women echoed through the gloom, mixed with children's cries and men calling out for their fathers, their sons, their wives, recognizing one another only by their voices. Many begged the gods for help, but just as many insisted there were no gods anymore, that this was the final and eternal night of the world. Even the sea seemed to flee the shore. A volcanic tsunami made the water retreat, leaving marine animals stranded on dry sand. In the middle of this chaos, Pliny had a dark thought he later confessed. I might boast that not a groan, not a cowardly word escaped me amid such dangers, were it not for the fact that I believed I was perishing with the world, and the world with me, which was a great comfort for my death. It was the resignation of someone convinced that everything was ending for everyone. Fortunately for him, the cloud stopped before reaching Mycenium. Yet the world he had known was already gone. Chapter 13. The Gray Dawn. When the fury of the volcano finally subsided, sunlight returned to the Bay of Naples, but the light revealed a landscape no one could recognize. Where green vineyards, lush forests, and thriving cities had once stood, there was now only a gray desert. A vast plain of ash and volcanic mud covered everything. Vesuvius itself had changed shape. Its summit was gone, blown apart by the explosion, and in its place lay a huge open crater, like a smoking wound in the earth. The coastline had shifted as well. The sea had been pushed back by the millions of tons of debris that had fallen. Places once bordering the shore now lay far inland. Pompeii no longer existed. It was buried beneath ash and pumice. Only the upper parts of a few large buildings poked timidly through the gray surface, like gravestones in a gigantic cemetery. Herculaneum had suffered an even worse fate. It was entombed beneath volcanic mud that hardened into solid rock as it cooled, erasing any trace that a city ever stood there. In Rome, Emperor Titus reacted swiftly. He organized a relief commission for the survivors and sent money and resources to try and rebuild the region. But it soon became clear that the task was impossible. The devastation was absolute. The ground was unstable, the air still poisonous in places, and there was simply nothing left to rebuild upon. The survivors, those who had managed to escape in time, returned briefly. Some tried desperately to dig tunnels through the ash to recover their belongings, but most simply stared at the gray plain, mourned their dead, and left forever, carrying with them only the memory of the day their world ended. Chapter 14. Oblivion. As the years passed, something remarkable happened. People forgot. Nature, slow but relentless, reclaimed what was hers. Rain washed away the loose ash. New plants took root in the volcanic soil, which turned out to be incredibly fertile. Where streets and houses once stood, forests and fresh vineyards began to grow. Farmers returned to cultivate the slopes of Vesuvius, drawn by the richness of the land. unaware or unwilling to remember what lay beneath their feet. The cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum became painful memories at first, then legends told by grandparents, and finally, myths. Their names vanished from maps. During the Middle Ages, people referred to the area where Pompeii had been simply as La Civita, the city, a vague name that hinted something ancient had once stood there, though no one knew exactly what it had been. From time to time, a farmer plowing his field would turn up a carved piece of marble or an old coin, but he regarded it merely as a curiosity. Vesuvius, the great giant, fell asleep once more. For centuries it remained calm, cloaked in vegetation, hiding its true nature beneath a green mantle. Human memory is fragile, and the need to live and work the land is stronger than the fear of the past. And so nearly 1,700 years passed. Two great Roman cities, perfectly preserved in their final moment, slept underground, waiting for the day when someone, by accident, would find them again and awaken their ghosts. Chapter 15. The Memories of Plaster. Oblivion ended in 1748 when the King of Naples ordered excavations to search for ancient statues for his palace. What they found was far more than art. It was an entire city frozen in time. Pompeii began to emerge into the light. But the most astonishing discovery would come more than a century later, in 1863, thanks to a brilliant Italian archaeologist named Giuseppe Fiorelli. During the excavation, workers often came across strange voids in the hardened ash layer. Inside those hollows were human bones. Until then, no one had paid them much attention. Fiorelli had a brilliant idea. He realized those empty spaces were the molds left by victims' bodies as they decomposed. The hot ash had hardened around them at the moment of death, capturing their exact shape. Fiorelli ordered his men that whenever they found one of these voids, they must not break it. Instead, they were to pour liquid plaster into it through a small opening, wait for the plaster to harden, and then carefully remove the surrounding ash. The result was chilling. What emerged from the earth were not cold skeletons, but people. The plaster had captured the exact moment of their agony with terrifying detail. Their clothing, their facial expressions, even the tension in their muscles during their final seconds of life could be seen. Suddenly, the tragedy stopped being ancient history and became painfully human. One cast showed a mother trying to shield her child with her own body. Another revealed two people locked in their final embrace, known today as the lovers. One showed a slave still wearing his chains, unable to flee. There was even a guard dog twisted onto its back, struggling to break free from its leash as the ash buried it. These casts are petrified memories of fear. They force us to look directly at those who lived through that day, reminding us that they were not legend or marble. They were people like us, trapped by a horror beyond understanding. Chapter 16. The Latent Threat. Today, Pompeii and Herculaneum are two of the most visited archaeological sites in the world. Millions of people walk their stone streets each year, marveling at the paintings, mosaics, and plaster echoes of their former inhabitants. It's easy to think of them as a museum, as a tragedy that belongs solely in the past. But to understand Pompeii's true meaning, you only need to look up. Vesuvius is still there. It remains an active volcano, one of the most dangerous and closely monitored on the planet. The mountain we see today is not the same one the Romans knew. The eruption of 79 tore off its summit, yet its fiery heart still beats beneath the earth. And the danger is greater than ever, not because the volcano is more violent, but because we are closer. In ancient times, around 30,000 people lived in the danger zone. Today, that same area is home to 3 million. Naples, a vibrant, chaotic metropolis, has grown until it nearly touches the volcano's slopes. Italian authorities have mapped out a high-risk area known as the Zona Rossa, the Red Zone. About 700,000 people live within it. The town's built directly over the volcanic deposits of past eruptions. They live on the exact path down which burning clouds would descend if the volcano awoke again. Scientists watch with every breath of the volcano, 24 hours a day. Sensors measure every tiny tremor, every change in temperature, every gas escaping from the mountain. Its last major eruption took place in 1944, a reminder that its silence is never permanent. Evacuation plans exist, but the reality is frightening. Moving nearly 1 million people in a matter of days or even hours is an almost impossible task. That's why what happened in Pompeii doesn't belong only to books or museums. It's a voice that still warns us from the silence of the earth. It is a brutal snapshot of what nature can do in less than 24 hours. It reminds us that our civilization, like that of the Romans, is fragile, and the ground we walk on is not as solid as we believe. Vesuvius still watches over the bay in silence, reminding us that the giant is not dead, only asleep.